What if everything you've been experiencing has been shaped by unseen patterns, subtle influences, and repeated cycles you never noticed? This message exposes hidden systems, emotional triggers, and silent agreements that shape your life, revealing how awareness alone can break control, restore clarity, and completely change your direction from within. I need you to listen carefully, because what I'm about to share is not something people talk about openly. There are things hidden in darkness that many choose to ignore, not because they are not real, but because they are uncomfortable to confront. I didn't learn these things from books or hearsay. I lived it, I walked in it. I understood it from the inside before I came out. And that is why I speak, not to create fear, but to expose what thrives in silence. There are systems of darkness that operate with intelligence, structure, and patience. Nothing there is random. People think witchcraft is just about strange rituals or old stories, but that is only the surface. Behind it is a network of influence that studies human behavior, patterns, weaknesses, and desires. It doesn't always attack loudly. In fact, its greatest strength is subtlety. It moves quietly, planting seeds that grow over time until a person begins to experience things they cannot explain. One of the first secrets is this: access is everything. Nothing happens without permission. That permission is not always conscious. Sometimes it comes through habits, words, environments, or associations. Many people unknowingly open doors through the things they entertain, the places they go, and even the thoughts they consistently agree with. Darkness doesn't force its way in, it looks for alignment. When something in a person's life aligns with its nature, that becomes an entry point. Another thing people don't realize is how much attention is paid to patterns. Repetition matters. When something negative keeps happening over and over, it is rarely coincidence. Cycles are studied and reinforced. If fear works, fear will be repeated. If distraction works, distraction will increase. The goal is to keep a person in a loop long enough that they begin to accept it as normal. Once something becomes normal, it no longer feels like an attack, it feels like life. There is also a strong emphasis on timing. Not everything is released at once. Some things are delayed intentionally. Opportunities may be blocked, not because they cannot happen, but because the timing is being manipulated. Delays can create frustration, and frustration can lead to wrong decisions. Those wrong decisions then open new doors. It becomes a chain reaction that started with something as simple as waiting longer than expected. Monitoring is another hidden reality, not always in the way people imagine, but through observation of behavior, reactions, and responses. Every reaction teaches something. Every emotional response reveals a weakness or a strength. The more predictable a person becomes, the easier it is to influence outcomes around them. That is why emotional control is more powerful than people think. When someone reacts without thinking, they reveal patterns that can be studied and used. Words carry weight. This is something many overlook. What a person says repeatedly can shape their reality more than they realize. Negative declarations, even made casually, can reinforce patterns that already exist. Words are not just sounds, they are agreements. When someone constantly speaks defeat, limitation, or fear, they are aligning themselves with those outcomes. It becomes easier for those patterns to take root and grow. There is also the use of distraction. Not every attack looks like a problem. Sometimes it looks like constant busyness, endless noise, or overwhelming information. When a person is always distracted, they cannot focus. When they cannot focus, they cannot discern. And when they cannot discern, they become vulnerable. Distraction keeps people from noticing what is actually happening beneath the surface of their lives. Relationships are another major channel. Not everyone who enters a person's life comes with good intentions. Some connections are strategic. They bring confusion, conflict, or subtle influence that shifts decisions over time. It's not always obvious. Sometimes it feels like normal interaction, but over time, the impact becomes clear. The wrong voice in the right moment can redirect an entire path. Fear is one of the most effective tools used. Not just fear of danger, but fear of the unknown. Fear of failure, fear of rejection. Fear limits movement. It keeps people from stepping into opportunities. It creates hesitation where boldness is needed. Once fear takes hold, it begins to dictate choices, and those choices shape outcomes. Another hidden aspect is the power of agreement. Nothing thrives without agreement. Even in subtle ways, agreement strengthens influence. This is why belief matters so much. What a person believes about themselves, about life, and about their future will determine what they accept and what they reject. If someone believes they are limited, they will reject opportunities that require growth. If they believe they are not worthy, they will avoid situations that could elevate them. There is also the concept of weariness. Not every battle is about immediate defeat. Sometimes it's about exhaustion. When someone is constantly drained, they lose the energy to resist. They become passive, and passivity allows things to continue unchecked. It's not always about overpowering a person, it's about wearing them down slowly. Silence plays a role as well. When people do not speak up, do not question, and do not seek understanding, things remain hidden. Silence allows patterns to continue without interruption. It creates an environment where things can operate without exposure, and what is not exposed cannot be addressed. One of the deeper secrets is that not everything is external. Some battles are internal. Thoughts, emotions, and perceptions can be influenced in ways that feel natural. A thought may not feel foreign, but its origin may not be what a person assumes. This is why awareness is critical. Not every thought deserves agreement. Not every feeling deserves action. There is also a long-term strategy involved. Not everything is about immediate results. Some things are planted early and manifest later. Seeds are sown in childhood, in early experiences, in moments that seem small at the time. Over years, those seeds grow into beliefs, habits, and patterns that shape a person's life. By the time the effect is visible, the cause is often forgotten. Isolation is another tactic. When someone is isolated, they lose perspective. They have no one to challenge their thoughts, no one to provide clarity. Isolation can make confusion feel like truth. It can make fear feel justified. It can make limitation feel permanent. Connection, on the other hand, brings perspective and strength. There is also the manipulations of identity. If a person does not know who they are, they can be influenced more easily. Identity determines decisions. When identity is unclear, decisions become inconsistent, and inconsistency creates openings. A person who is grounded in their identity is harder to influence because they have a clear sense of direction. Another hidden reality is the use of gradual change. Rarely does anything shift suddenly. It happens step by step, slowly enough that it goes unnoticed. A small compromise here, a small shift there, until the overall direction has changed completely. By the time it is recognized, it feels difficult to reverse. There is also a focus on emotional triggers. Certain situations, words, or experiences can trigger strong reactions. Those triggers are not random, they are connected to deeper patterns. When a trigger is activated, it can override logic and lead to decisions that would not normally be made. Understanding those triggers is key to maintaining control. One more thing people don't often consider is the role of consistency. What is done consistently has more impact than what is done occasionally. Small actions repeated daily can shape outcomes more than large actions done once. Consistency builds momentum, and momentum creates direction. I'm telling you these things because awareness changes everything. When you see clearly, you make different choices. When you understand patterns, you can break them. When you recognize influence, you can resist it. Darkness depends on ignorance, on people not knowing what is happening. The moment awareness comes in, its power begins to weaken. You don't need to live in fear of these things, but you do need to be conscious. Pay attention to patterns in your life. Notice what repeats. Be mindful of your words, your thoughts, your environment, and your connections. Everything matters more than it seems. There are things that operate quietly, but they are not unstoppable. Once exposed, they lose their advantage. And that is why I speak, not to scare you, but to open your eyes. Because once you see, you can choose differently. And that choice can change everything. And there is something else you must understand, something that many people never realize until it is too late. Not every opportunity is truly an opportunity. Some things come dressed as breakthroughs, but they carry consequences hidden beneath the surface. When something appears suddenly, without clarity, without peace, without alignment, you must question it. Because one of the most effective strategies is not just to block progress, but to redirect it into something that looks good at first, and then slowly drains, confuses, or traps. Discernment is not just about avoiding danger, it is about recognizing truth. And truth does not always shout, it often whispers. It requires stillness to hear it. But in a world filled with noise, many people never become still long enough to recognize what is real and what is not. That is why constant noise is not harmless. It keeps people from hearing the subtle warnings that could protect them. Another hidden layer is the use of emotional attachments. When a person becomes emotionally attached to something unhealthy, it becomes difficult to let go, even when they know it is harming them. That attachment can be to a person, a habit, a lifestyle, or even a mindset. And once attachment is formed, it creates resistance to change. It makes a person defend what they should be walking away from. There is also the element of imitation. Not everything that looks right is right. Some things are designed to mimic what is good, to appear similar enough that people do not question it. It's a subtle distortion, just enough to mislead. That is why surface level observation is not enough. You have to look deeper beyond appearance, beyond presentation, into the effect something has over time. And then there is the manipulation of urgency. When people feel rushed, they often make decisions without proper consideration. Urgency creates pressure, and pressure can override wisdom. Not every situation requires immediate action, but when it feels like it does, it's important to pause and evaluate. Because some of the biggest mistakes are made in moments of unnecessary urgency. Pause of delay can also create confusion. When something that should move forward keeps being postponed, it can cause doubt. That doubt can lead to second guessing, and second guessing can lead to inaction. Inaction then reinforces the delay, creating a cycle that feeds itself. Breaking that cycle requires awareness and intentional movement, even when clarity is not complete. Another thing people overlook is the power of small compromises. It rarely starts with something big. It starts small, almost insignificant. A decision that seems harmless, a choice that feels convenient. But those small compromises accumulate. They build on each other until they create a structure that becomes difficult to dismantle. That is why integrity in small things matters more than most people think. There is also the use of comparison. When people constantly compare themselves to others, they begin to lose sight of their own path. Comparison can create insecurity, jealousy, or even false confidence. It shifts focus away from personal growth and places it on external validation. And when validation comes from outside, it can be manipulated. Another hidden aspect is the distortion of value. When a person begins to value the wrong things, their decisions will reflect that. If someone values appearance over substance, they will make choices that prioritize what looks good rather than what is good. If they value approval over truth, they will compromise to be accepted. Values shape direction, and when values are distorted, direction follows. There is also the concept of gradual desensitization. When something is introduced slowly over time, it becomes normalized. What once felt uncomfortable begins to feel acceptable, and what becomes acceptable eventually becomes standard. This is how boundaries are eroded, not through sudden change, but through gradual exposure. One of the deeper strategies involves confusion. When a person is confused, they hesitate, they become uncertain, and uncertainty creates vulnerability. Clarity, on the other hand, creates confidence. That is why clarity is powerful. It removes hesitation and allows for decisive action. There is also the influence of environment. Where you are consistently affects how you think, how you feel, and how you act. Environments carry atmospheres, and those atmospheres influence behavior. If someone is constantly in an environment that promotes negativity, it will eventually affect them, even if they resist at first. Another thing to understand is the role of repetition in shaping belief. The more something is repeated, the more it is accepted. Even if it is not true, repetition can make it feel true. This is why it is important to question what you hear, what you see, and what you are told repeatedly. Not everything repeated is accurate. There is also the manipulation of focus. What a person focuses on grows in their awareness. If someone focuses on problems, problems will seem larger. If they focus on limitations, limitations will feel stronger. Focus determines perception, and perception influences action. And then there is the issue of misplaced trust. Trust is powerful, but when it is placed in the wrong place, it can lead to disappointment and harm. Not everyone deserves access to your thoughts, your plans, or your vulnerabilities. Trust should be built over time, not given freely without discernment. Another hidden truth is that resistance often comes before progress. When something valuable is about to happen, there is often an increase in challenges. This is not random, it is a test of persistence. Many people give up just before breakthrough because the resistance becomes intense. But understanding this pattern can help a person push through rather than retreat. There is also the strategy of keeping people busy but unproductive. Activity does not always equal progress. A person can be constantly doing something but not moving forward. This creates the illusion of effort without actual results. It drains energy without producing growth. One more thing you need to see clearly is the role of identity reinforcement. Whatever a person repeatedly identifies with becomes stronger. If someone constantly sees themselves as a victim, they will interpret situations in a way that reinforces that identity. If they see themselves as capable, they will approach challenges differently. Identity shapes interpretation. There is also the use of doubt as a tool. Doubt can weaken confidence and create hesitation. When a person doubts themselves, they are less likely to take action. And without action, opportunities are missed. Doubt does not always come loudly. Sometimes it comes as a quiet question that slowly grows. Another layer is the influence of past experiences. What someone has been through can shape how they respond to current situations. If past experiences are not understood and processed, they can create patterns that repeat. Breaking those patterns requires awareness and intentional change. There is also the tactic of overwhelming a person with too many options. When there are too many choices, it can create paralysis. A person becomes unsure of what to choose, and in that uncertainty, they choose nothing. Simplicity, on the other hand, creates clarity and movement. And you must understand the importance of awareness in all of this. Awareness is not passive, it requires attention, observation, and reflection. It means not just going through life on autopilot, but actively engaging with what is happening around and within you. Because once you become aware, things begin to shift. You start to notice patterns you didn't see before. You begin to question things you once accepted. You become more intentional with your choices. And that intentionality changes outcomes. There are layers to everything. What you see is not always all there is. There is depth beneath the surface, and that depth holds the real story. When you begin to look beyond the surface, you gain insight, and insight leads to understanding. I am telling you these things so you don't remain unaware, because ignorance is what allows these patterns to continue unchecked. When you know, you can respond differently. When you see clearly, you can act wisely. Pay attention to what repeats. Pay attention to what drains you. Pay attention to what brings confusion versus what brings clarity. These are indicators. They reveal more than words ever could. And as you move forward, remember that not everything needs to be fought aggressively. Some things need to be recognized and avoided. Some things need to be understood and released. Strategy is not always about confrontation. Sometimes it is about positioning. Your life is shaped by what you allow, what you accept, and what you align with. These are choices, even when they don't feel like it. And every choice creates direction. So stay aware, stay observant, stay intentional, because the more you understand, the less influence these hidden things will have over you. And that understanding is what gives you the ability to move differently, to choose differently, and ultimately to live differently. There is something even deeper that many never talk about, and it is this: influence does not always begin where you think it does. Sometimes it begins in the unseen habits of your daily routine. The small things you repeat without thinking become entry points for larger patterns. When a person wakes up already feeling defeated, already expecting nothing to change, that expectation begins to shape the entire day. It's subtle but powerful. Expectations act like silent agreements, and over time they begin to form outcomes. You also need to understand that not every battle is loud. In fact, the most effective ones are quiet. They happen in the mind, in moments when no one is watching, when a thought is planted and left to grow. If that thought is not challenged, it develops roots. It becomes belief. And once something becomes belief, it begins to control behavior. That is how something small turns into something strong. Another hidden reality is the way pressure is applied over time. Not all at once, but gradually. A person may not even notice it at first. A little stress here, a little tension there, until it builds to a point where they feel overwhelmed. And when someone is overwhelmed, they don't think clearly. They react instead of responding. And reaction is easier to influence than intention. There is also a pattern of creating false narratives. When something happens repeatedly, the mind tries to explain it. But if the explanation is wrong, it leads to the wrong response. For example, if someone experiences repeated setbacks, they might begin to believe they are the problem, instead of recognizing a pattern that needs to be broken. That false narrative keeps them stuck because they are addressing the wrong issue. Another thing that operates quietly is the distortion of time perception. When people feel like they are running out of time, they rush. When they feel like nothing is changing, they lose hope. Both extremes create vulnerability. Time is not just a measure, it is a pressure point. And when it is manipulated in perception, it affects decisions. There is also the element of hidden agreements made in moments of emotion. When someone is hurt, angry, or discouraged, they may say things or think things that they later forget. But those moments matter. Those words, those thoughts, can create internal agreements that shape future reactions. That is why emotional awareness is critical. Not every feeling should lead to a decision. You must also pay attention to the way distractions evolve. At first, they may seem harmless: entertainment, noise, constant scrolling, endless engagement. But over time, they begin to consume attention. And attention is one of the most valuable resources you have. Where your attention goes, your energy follows. And where your energy flows, results begin to form. Another hidden layer is the manipulation of priorities. When priorities are out of order, everything else becomes misaligned. A person may focus on things that do not matter while neglecting what truly does. This creates imbalance, and imbalance leads to instability. Stability comes from knowing what matters most and aligning actions accordingly. There is also the concept of internal conflict. When a person wants one thing but believes another, it creates tension. That tension leads to inconsistency, and inconsistency weakens progress. Alignment between belief and desire is necessary for movement. Without it, a person will struggle to move forward even when opportunities are present. Another strategy that often goes unnoticed is the reinforcement of limiting identities through external voices. When someone hears the same negative message repeatedly from people, from media, from their environment, it begins to feel true, even if it is not. This is why guarding what you listen to is just as important as guarding what you say. There is also a pattern of creating dependency. When a person becomes dependent on something or someone for validation, direction, or worth, they lose autonomy. And without autonomy, they can be influenced more easily. Independence of thought is critical. It allows a person to evaluate situations clearly rather than relying entirely on external input. You should also understand the power of unresolved issues. Things that are not addressed do not disappear, they remain beneath the surface, influencing behavior in subtle ways. A past disappointment can shape future expectations. An unresolved conflict can affect new relationships. Ignoring something does not remove its impact, it only delays its effect. Another hidden truth is that exhaustion is not always physical. It can be mental, emotional, or even decision based. When a person has to make too many decisions without rest, they become fatigued. And decision fatigue leads to poor choices. That is why rest is not optional, it is necessary for clarity. There is also the tactic of blending truth with distortion. Not everything presented is completely false. Sometimes it is partially true, with just enough distortion to mislead. This makes it harder to detect because it feels familiar. That is why critical thinking is essential. You cannot accept everything at face value. Another layer involves the slow erosion of confidence. Confidence is not usually destroyed in one moment. It is chipped away over time through repeated doubt, small failures, and negative reinforcement. And once confidence is low, a person becomes hesitant. That hesitation limits action, and limited action reduces results. There is also the influence of hidden expectations placed by others. Sometimes people carry expectations that were never consciously chosen. Expectations from family, society, or culture. These expectations can shape decisions without a person realizing it. And when those expectations do not align with personal purpose, they create internal conflict. Another thing to be aware of is the way comfort can become a trap. Comfort is not always safe. Sometimes it keeps a person in a place where they are not growing. It creates a false sense of security. Growth often requires discomfort, and avoiding that discomfort can lead to stagnation. There is also the strategy of creating unnecessary complexity. When things are made more complicated than they need to be, it creates confusion. Confusion leads to hesitation, and hesitation leads to inaction. Simplicity, on the other hand, creates clarity and movement. You must also recognize the importance of self awareness. Without it, A person becomes reactive rather than intentional. They move based on impulse rather than understanding. Self awareness allows you to see your own patterns, your own triggers, your own tendencies. And once you see them, you can begin to change them. Another hidden aspect is the way momentum works. Momentum can be positive or negative. Once something gains momentum, it becomes easier to continue in that direction. That is why small changes matter. A small positive change repeated consistently can create powerful momentum over time. There is also the issue of misplaced effort. Not all effort leads to progress. A person can work hard in the wrong direction and see no results. That can lead to frustration and discouragement. Direction matters just as much as effort. Without the right direction, effort is wasted. Another subtle strategy is the use of emotional highs and lows to create instability. When someone is constantly moving between extremes, they struggle to maintain consistency. Stability allows for steady progress. Instability disrupts it. There is also the manipulation of perception through selective exposure. When a person only sees one side of something, their understanding becomes limited. This can shape opinions, beliefs, and decisions in ways that are not fully informed. Seeking multiple perspectives brings balance. Another hidden truth is that discipline is more powerful than motivation. Motivation comes and goes, but discipline creates consistency, and consistency produces results. Relying only on motivation leaves a person vulnerable to fluctuation. There is also the pattern of avoiding responsibility. When a person avoids taking responsibility for their actions, they give up control over their outcomes. Responsibility is not about blame, it is about ownership. And ownership allows for change. Another layer involves the importance of boundaries. Without boundaries, a person becomes open to influence from every direction. Boundaries protect time, energy, and focus. They create structure and prevent unnecessary interference. You should also understand that clarity often comes after action, not before. Waiting for complete clarity can lead to inaction. Sometimes movement is what brings understanding. Taking a step reveals the next step. There is also the role of resilience. Challenges are inevitable. What matters is how a person responds to them. Resilience allows a person to continue despite difficulty. It prevents setbacks from becoming stopping points. Another hidden reality is the importance of intentional living. Living intentionally means making choices with awareness rather than simply reacting to circumstances. It means deciding what you want and aligning your actions with that vision. And as all of this unfolds, one thing becomes clear. Awareness is not a one time event, it is a continuous process. It requires attention, reflection, and adjustment. It is something that must be maintained because the moment awareness fades, patterns can return. The moment attention is lost, distractions can take over. The moment intention is gone, direction can shift. So you must stay engaged. Stay conscious of what is happening around you and within you, because everything you allow, everything you accept, everything you repeat, it all contributes to the life you are building. And once you truly understand that, you begin to move differently. You begin to think differently. You begin to choose differently. And those choices, repeated over time, begin to create a completely different reality. When you step back from everything that has been said, one truth stands above the rest. Most of what controls people does not announce itself loudly. It operates through patterns, repetition, emotions, distractions, and unnoticed agreements. It works best in environments where people are unaware of how deeply their daily choices matter. And that is why awareness changes everything. What you have heard throughout this message is not meant to create fear, but clarity. Fear makes people reactive, but clarity makes people intentional. And intentional living is where real change begins. Because once you start recognizing that your thoughts are not random, your habits are not insignificant, and your environment is not neutral, you begin to take responsibility for what you allow into your life. Many people remain stuck, not because they lack opportunity, but because they do not recognize the patterns shaping their decisions. Repetition of thoughts becomes belief. Repetition of belief becomes identity. And identity becomes direction. That means the small things you think, say, and do daily are not small at all. They are building something over time, whether you realize it or not. This is why discernment is more important than speed. Not every door that opens is meant to be entered. Not every voice that sounds familiar is guiding you correctly. Not every feeling that feels strong is leading you in the right direction. Learning to pause, observe, and evaluate is what protects you from moving blindly into cycles that drain rather than build. At the same time, you must understand that not everything external has power over you unless you give it influence. Much of what affects people only works because it is accepted internally. Attention, agreement, repetition, and emotional response are the real points of control. Once you become aware of this, you stop reacting automatically and start choosing consciously. There is also a deeper realization. Growth is not always about adding more, but about removing what weakens clarity, removing noise, removing unnecessary influence, removing distorted thinking, and removing patterns that no longer serve purpose. Space is required for direction to become clear again. Without space, everything feels confusing and heavy. You also learn that consistency matters more than intensity. What you do every day shapes your future more than what you do occasionally with great effort. Small disciplined actions, repeated over time, create strength, while inconsistent effort creates cycles of frustration. Understanding this shifts focus from emotional bursts to steady progress. And perhaps the most important understanding is that awareness is not passive knowledge, it is active responsibility. Once you see more clearly, you cannot unsee it. And once you cannot unsee it, you are responsible for what you do with it. That responsibility is not a burden, it is power, because it means change is now in your hands, not in external circumstances. So, moving forward, the real task is not just to listen, but to observe your own life with honesty. Notice what patterns repeat. Notice what drains you and what strengthens you. Notice what influences your thinking and what distorts your clarity. And then begin, step by step, to realign your choices with what builds stability, peace, and direction. Because in the end, the strongest position a person can reach is not just awareness of what exists around them, but mastery over how they respond to it.